Vivisection. Sir Eardley Wilmot, MP, has given notice that he will next year introduce a bill for the total suppression of vivisection. Since the anti-vivisectionists will do their best during the autumn to stir up feeling on this subject, it may not be amiss to lay before our readers some reasons which may induce them to investigate the question before joining in the cry raised for the total suppression of experiments on animals. I am perfectly aware that in so doing I am laying myself open to furious attack, but as I am pretty well accustomed to be abused for speaking out for that which I believe to be true and useful, this probability does not seem so alarming to me as it might to many. Under the general term vivisection are included all experiments on living animals, whether by instruments or by drugs. A bill for the suppression of vivisection would stop all experiments causing pain to the subject. The question to be decided is, would such a law as is proposed tend to the decrease of human and animal pain, using the word animal to denote living beings other than mankind? I answer distinctly in the negative, and I propose to show that such a law would enormously increase and perpetuate human and animal pain, and that the comparatively small amount of pain which would be prevented, small when contrasted with the vast mass of agony endured in the world from natural causes, small when contrasted with the agony which theists might regard as God-inflicted, would be purchased by a fearful price of preventable pain in the future. Before considering 1. the necessity, and 2. proved value of vivisection, a few introductory remarks are necessary. Vivisection should only be performed by well-skilled scientists engaged in original investigation. No young student should engage in it, for the very simple reason that such a student would inflict unnecessary pain and would obtain no new and useful results. Vivisection should not be performed for needless redemonstration of thoroughly well-ascertained facts. It was right that Harvey should vivisect while studying the movement of the blood. It would be wrong for a young student to repeat Harvey's experiments for the mere demonstration of the admitted fact that the blood circulated. Vivisection, when practiced by eminent scientists, should not be under state control. Only men far more learned than the leading men of science could decide on the utility and therefore on the rightfulness of experiments made by the latter. Such men do not exist, and to subject the learned physiologist to the control of the unlearned inspector is a mockery and an insult. A mockery because the ignorant official might stop an experiment at the most critical period. An insult because such inspection implies that the doctor or the scientist thus supervised may be guilty of needless cruelty. We trust our dearest into these men's hands for the most agonizing operations. If we can trust them with these, surely we may trust them with the lower animals. The man who comes as the saviour of life into the chamber of one beloved, albeit he comes with a knife, scalpel, and forceps, can scarcely turn into a devil of brutality when he crosses the threshold of his laboratory. Nay, the very delicacy and steadiness of hand, the firmness of touch, the keen sensitiveness which recognises by feel the unseen tissue through which the knife is passing, the swiftness which means safety where delay or hesitation would mean death. All these which we so gladly and thankfully utilise in the hour of our need, all these have been learned in the long laboratory practice, to which zeal without knowledge would put an end. The infliction of pain is not the criterion of the cruelty of an action. Anti-vivisectionists circulate the most harrowing descriptions and the most revolting pictures of the experiments performed by scientists. But it would be the easiest thing in the world to outdo those by descriptions and pictures of operations within the walls of a hospital which have resulted in the saving of life. A very harrowing description might be given of cutting out the mammary glands of a female dog, and anti-vivisectionists would use this as an argument against vivisection. But an equally harrowing description might be given of cutting off the breast of a woman, an operation not infrequently performed. Ought this to be used as an argument against the operation? If not, why not? In both cases, the ultimate result of the excision is the saving of pain and of life. but in both cases the means thereto is the infliction of very agonized pain. If an artist would go round any surgical museum and paint some of the preparations there displayed, say a partially performed operation of lithotomy, a cancer in the womb, and so on, some very horrible pictures might be made of human vivisection. If these yield an argument against surgery, then we had better go back to the day when cancer in the stomach was treated by the exhibition of the thumb of St. Ursula, an operation perfectly painless and perfectly useless. Religion is said to be against vivisection, and we hear a great deal of talk about the great Father of all. If the argument is relevant in any way, it is certainly on the side of the vivisectors. The amount of pain inflicted is an insignificant portion of the sum total of the pain in the world. Animals starve by millions in woods and fields, in air and on land. They are tortured by the most loathsome diseases, by agonies long drawn out. If the great Father of all sees this objectless and useless suffering unmoved, nay, inflicts it as part of his scheme of creation, can he be supposed to object to the comparatively microscopic amount of pain inflicted in the laboratory? As excuse for the cruelty of nature, we are told that some good purpose underlies it all. The same answer applies to the work of the physiologist, and in far more forcible fashion, for no immediate nor even ultimate good is proved to result from the daily torture inflicted on myriads of sentient beings by nature, that is, according to theists, by God, while, as will be shown, immediate and invaluable results accrue from the pain inflicted on units by physiologists. It is not consistent to stop vivisection and leave untouched other sufferings inflicted on animals by man. Who that has heard a pig screaming in the death agony can join an anti-vivisection society and dine off pork? Who, remembering how many birds are winged and escape to die slowly, can touch game? How can the state stop vivisection and allow the coursing of hares to continue, or the hunting of foxes and of stags, or the shooting of birds, or the angling for fish? The only answer to this argument is that the infliction of pain for the gratification of the palate or for the amusement of the idle is permissible, but for the advancement of knowledge and the curing of the sick is detestable. But those of us who are not blinded by prejudice think that anti-vivisectionists who swallow the camel need not strain so terribly over the gnat. Annie Besant. Vivisection. To the editors of the National Reformer. One of your readers, greatly pained by the recent articles in your paper on the subject of vivisection, and knowing that for 10 years past I have made a special study of that subject, has written to ask of me a reply to Mrs. Besant. I shall give that reply as courteously and as briefly as argument will admit, trusting to the sense of justice, which doubtless controls the editorship of the National Reformer, to hear the other side speak. I do not appear as an advocate of the clerical party, and therefore shall make no appeal for my case to the Church or to the book it so ill interprets. For me, the orthodox priest is the enemy of the human race, and it is precisely because I regard him in that light that I cannot abide the resuscitation of the worst and most pernicious of his doctrines, that of the vicarious salvation. Mrs. Besant and those who think with her appear to me to have turned the wolf out of doors in order to go to bed with the jackal. In other words, they have rejected the ecclesiastical priest and his gospel of redemption by means of the suffering and cruel death of the innocent, only to accept with open hands the self-same doctrines formulated anew by the prince of science. Mrs. Besant says truly that the infliction of pain is not the criterion of the cruelty of the action, and she proceeds to illustrate this proposition by reference to the terrible character of many operations daily performed on human patients for the relief of their suffering from cancer, tumour, and the like. But the tremendous and radical differences existing between such cases as these and the practices of vivisection, which difference she totally overlooks, lies in this fact, that all these painful operations on human patients are performed for the patient's own relief, one beneficent, and, on the other hand, vivisection is performed on healthy and uninjured victims for vicarious purposes, and for no benevolent object whatever, so far as the victim itself is concerned. Is not this a distinction striking at the root of the comparison Mrs. Besant wishes to institute between the operating room and the laboratory? With regard to the charge so often repeated of the inconsistency of attacking the practice of vivisection while encouraging that of sport, of butchery, and so on, I have yet to learn that it is customary for anti-vivisectors to uphold these barbarisms. I am myself a vegetarian, and for nearly a dozen years have tasted no flesh of any kind. I do not say that all objectors to vivisection follow my rule in this latter respect, but I do say that I never yet met one who was not as ardently and as unsparingly the enemy of cruelty in the field and in the park as in the laboratory. Who are the writers against battues, pigeon matches, and cruel gins for ground game? They are the anti-vivisectors. And if Mrs. Besant doubts the fact, she has only to turn over a few pages of their chief organ, the anti-vivisectionist, to be convinced that I speak accurately. I do not linger over this point because the evidence on my side is so ample and so easily obtainable. The reason why anti-vivisectors have petitioned Parliament against vivisection and not against any other form of cruelty is simply because vivisection represents the worst form of all, not only in its details but in its pretensions. It is organised, systematic, serious cruelty, the biggest and the most ferocious of all the heads of the Hydra. It involves a principle. No other form of cruelty does this. Obviously, in the limited space of a mere letter, I cannot examine and answer categorically all Mrs. Besant's paragraphs on the scientific value of vivisection. But if she will give me as many columns as she has taken, I will gladly do so. I will but make 2 or 3 observations with regard to the names she quotes as those of men notably indebted to vivisection for their discoveries. Harvey did not owe his knowledge of the circulation of the blood to this practice, as was long ago very conclusively proved from Harvey's own writings by Dr. Bridges in the Fortnightly Review. The world is indebted for this discovery to the patient investigation which Harvey made of the position and nature of the valves in the veins and at the orifices of the heart upon the dead subject, and yet more, to his genius, which saw in them a meaning no commoner mind had been able to see. The very nature of this investigation and the manner of it would obviously have precluded the possibility of its being made on a living animal, even if we had not Harvey's own words to tell us how it was made. As for Sir Charles Bell, he operated on 1 rabbit and bitterly regretted it afterwards, and Professor Ferrier has admitted in his book on the localization of the functions of the brain that he was unable to determine whether many of the most important results obtained by his operations on the brain of apes was due to the lesion of the brain substance itself, or to the serious injuries necessarily inflicted on the contiguous tissues in order to enable him to penetrate to the nerve matter. Is it worthwhile to refer to the innumerable contradictions with which his conclusions have been everywhere assailed by his brother vivisectors? Let me hope that Mrs. Besant and other supporters of scientific torture do not really know what it is that they advocate. Let me hope they have been misled by the lies which vivisectors do not scruple to tell in order to make the foolish public believe that the experiments of the laboratory consist of such trifles as the puncture of a frog's leg or the inoculation of a few mice. For were it possible to them to realize the horrible, sickening truth in all its nakedness, the heart would swell and the fist would clench of the most indifferent among them. Had they heard, as I have heard, the terrible, never-to-be-forgotten burst of cries and sobs and moans, human in their appeal and pathos, which rise from the underground laboratories of the Paris School of Medicine, whenever a distant door swings on its hinges, their hearts, like mine, would be overfraught and long to break. I am not ashamed to say that when first I heard those cries, and learnt that they came from creatures in torture, innocent, harmless, loving creatures that had shared the joys and griefs and destinies of men, creatures made in all respects as we are, suffering as we do, hoping as we do, loving as we do, when I realized that these were crucified on the torture trough in the underground dens of the vivisector, and dying there by inches. I laid my head on my hands where I sat and prayed, God, if God there were, that I might have such strength as one man might to root this curse of torture from the world. I prayed with tears, bitter and fierce and burning, for I too was tortured. I too was in hell. Am I told that science has the right to do these things? That it is just the lesser beast and the defenceless beast should suffer for that greater and more powerful beast, which is man? I answer that science is not torturing only horses and dogs and rabbits and guinea pigs. It is torturing me and thousands upon thousands of men and women who feel as I feel, and who suffer more acutely in the pains of those innocent creatures than we should even in our own persons. I say that it is hell to live from day to day and year to year and know such deeds as these are done under the sanction of the law. Had the public, for whose benefit the vivisectors say they set their racks and their knives to work, no right to reply that, on such terms as these, they will not accept benefits? Is there to be liberty for the vivisector only, and the gag and the handcuff for the public and for the dumb beast? Let us be men, not pitiful cowards, and let us say bravely and nobly that, if benefits are to be got only on such awful terms as those the vivisector proposes, we will not have them at all, but prefer moral dignity to physical conveniences. Better to come off with a clean conscience and a human heart than with these fortified for the sake of a whole skin. In concluding her article, Mrs. Besant says that a man is not necessarily cruel to animals because he is a vivisector. He may love dogs, and yet be ready to cut them up alive. A notorious thief once told me there was nobody who valued honesty more than he did. I have also repeatedly heard habitual drunkards protest their sobriety. But I believe neither the thief nor the drunkard, and I believe the vivisector as little when he assures me, across his torture trough, that he loves mercy and justice. No doubt he may be kind to his dog, his cat, his horse, but the kindness is not for the animals, but for the owner. Show me the deeds of a man, his words are no evidence in the face of these. One word more only. Do not let us, in the 19th century, return to the method of the Inquisition in the cause of truth. Nature, like the miserable martyrs put to the questions by the priests stretched on the rack and interrogated with knives and hot irons, will answer us only with a lie. If we are to have truth at all, it must be got by human means, and not by the aid of the pincers, the gouge, the screw, and the furnace. It is not enough that our object be a noble one, if we have to blush for the means we use to attain it. Anna Kingsford.